Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Phil Jordan. He's an author, and he's here to talk about his latest book, and it's about an interesting topic, prohibition. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Scott. Nice to be here.
Yeah, it's kind of a topic that's near and dear to my heart, as I've written two historic versions of prohibition, and I am the grandson of a person who spent a bit of time in jail for violating the laws of the land back in those days. And it was an honor to be one of your readers of your book.
Well, I'm honored to have you take a look at it and paw through those pages. I built it as an historical novel. I was inspired to write it in part by something that a friend of mine told me. His mother passed along a tale about the discovery of an old rum runner's car. It was found in a stable abandoned in Lindenville, where he grew up. And I thought about that. Years and years ago, I was a salesman. I traveled all over New England, but in Vermont, typically going through the NEK, I'd stay at the old Lindbrook motel up in Lindenville. And they had a framed newspaper on the wall from, I guess, the late 1932. And there was a feature article on the rum runners who once used Lindenville as a sort of distribution hub.
Right.
Just would hang out looking tough on Depot Street. And that kind of stewed in my head for a while. And I started to write this, but it was a very deep dig into history to make sure that I could back up everything that I was putting into this delightful little hopper of a book here.
Now, tell me, so you didn't have any deep connection to the community of like Lyndonville and St. Johnsbury that you focus on?
No, I was basically a salesman all through the 80s and 90s. And I just really fell in love with the town. I stayed in St. Johnsbury occasionally also. I like the people, I like the history, and going back into the time when prohibition was the law of the land, there was a lot going on. In fact, there was sort of this back and forth, if you will, the tug of war between the rum runners and the authorities. And one of the interesting aspects of the history in the area is that there was a big raid and the sheriff confiscated a vast amount of booze, and not too long afterward, somehow or other, it disappeared. It was stolen right out from under the nose.
Right, and then even the quote outlaws did battle with each other. You had the locals. Who most of them were good old boys, trying to make some extra money, and then you had the hardened criminals who came to Lyndonville and St. Johnsbury area to set up shop. And they set up shop there because it wasn't too close to the border. It was, 30, 35 miles. And sometimes these two groups of bootleggers would hijack each other's loads. And, but you know what impressed me in reading the book is that you wrote it in so much detail. I would have sworn you would actually live there versus just visiting there, because, my mind is not geared towards writing novels, as in I like history. But when you write, a lot of people don't realize if you're going to write particularly novels like yours, even though it's not all fact, you've got to get your fiction right. As in, like, you've got to get your dates right. You've got to get your cars right.
Oh, exactly. And I very much got into this because as I crafted this, put it together, I had to get one of the characters. The main character is a 17-year-old boy named Joey Ross, and he's grown up very much in the shadow of his overbearing older brother, who's a real piece of work. He's quite the ladies' man. He also works for a funeral director, and his game, the funeral director's game, is on an almost regular basis sneaking booze across the border from Canada in the back of a hearse inside a coffin. And Joey, as he calls himself, his real name is Joseph Ross, he's a fictional character, has to basically fill in for his brother due to circumstances beyond his control. His brother gets in trouble, falsely accused of a murder, and the 17-year-old boy has to make a trip up to Canada to bring some contraband across the border. It's interesting, and one of the things that I really delighted in this was doing the research about place names, buildings that no longer exist, but which did exist in the 1920s and early 30s. The funeral director basically is an interesting character. He bears a striking resemblance to Calvin Coolidge, and he has that wizened look that made people observe that they thought that Calvin Coolidge might have been weaned on a pickle. Well, you know, there's a lot of interesting chit chat like that. But we start right in, and when in chapter 2 we get to meet one of the rum runners, and I'll read a paragraph or two to you. "Pull the damn car over," shouted the policeman as he clung to the driver's side door of the massive 1932 Cadillac sedan he jumped onto, trying to stop it. "You're a wanted man for murder." And now, as the car rocketed forward, he wished he hadn't done that, but it was too late. "I know that, pal," said the driver as he poked his .38 through the open window and shot the rookie cop point blank in the chest. He watched in the rearview mirror as the body tumbled onto the pavement. It rolled to a stop in the gutter like a rag doll tossed out a window. And Mike McCone, otherwise known as Cadillac Mac, smiling in satisfaction, put his foot down, driving even faster now. His load of illegal alcohol smuggled across the line from Canada secure in the back. After all, there were no witnesses to worry about this time. And one of the things you find out, as you alluded to a couple of minutes ago, there are crooks in this book. They're part of a larger gang from Canada who muscle in on the independents, and that really makes an interesting mashup. Your turn.
Right. Your attention to just little detail. I think Peggy Pearl of the St. Johnsbury History and Heritage Center, I think she pointed that out in her praise of the book, as the incredible depth of detail.
Yeah, she said it's a great story about the time in Vermont when booze was illegal, but when there were all the ways to get it anyway.
Right. Yeah. As I was saying, my grandfather spent time, who I never knew, he was gone before I made my grand entrance into the world. But a lot of times, it's interesting. If you have a person who broke prohibition laws, for some people, it's a badge of honor, and for decades. And other people, it was a mark of shame. Well, my father, who wasn't even born when his father did this, never really knew the story. And I have personally, I've never had a speeding ticket, knock on wood. I've lived a boring life. And I often said, if I ever break the law, I at least want to make it memorable. Something harmlessly memorable. I don't want to just do something run of the mill. Well, when I finally found out, newspapers.com has changed my life. You can find anything now that in the old newspapers. I finally found out what he'd done. And apparently he wanted to make it memorable. He was a small time, just run of the mill person who made just a little bit of alcohol and it was amazing. He got about a year in jail, but he sold liquor or moonshine. I'm not quite certain which one, but it wasn't how much he sold. It was he sold it in baby bottles with nipples on it. And I thought that was, I might actually go jail for a year to say I've been the baby bottle bootlegger or something. But yeah, that was his story. And I don't think he ever committed a crime before, and I don't think he ever committed a crime after. But just for that moment in time, he was dealing booze and baby bottles.
Yeah, I guess his excuse could be that the babies made me do it, right?
Very true. Very true. But it's an interesting, in the Prohibition era, no matter what, your book is going to sell well, because no matter what, like you've been in the publishing business as well, no matter what, no matter if it's newspapers, magazines, books, if there's a little bit of deviancy in it or something, people just people like the thrill or whatever. And bootlegging, brings out a lot of imagination, and not all of it's true, but it's interesting.
Well, it's one of the things, Scott, is, and I point this out in the foreword of the book, is that when this scene opens, it's 1932, the FBI hasn't been formed yet. It was merely an investigative bureau. Vermont didn't have any state police.
Right.
It just had county sheriffs, and it had, I believe, 14 motorcycle patrol officers. Right. And they were the law on the highway seasonally. And they would patrol during the summer and fall months. And then they put the motorcycles away, and a lot of them worked as fish and game officers or drove taxi cabs in the off season during the winter. But it was more sort of an innocent era, because the well-known, better-known criminals, Bonnie and Clyde, Babyface Nelson, all of that, John Dillinger, that was later. That was in 1933 and 1934. So you had this cross-border traffic. A lot of people got into the game. It was a cat and mouse game. It was very interesting. And what went on back then in the late days of Prohibition seems to hold true in the drug dealing business today. As time went on, the big players in the game found out that if they sent a 16 or 17-year-old kid out on the road with a load of booze and he got apprehended, they might lose the car, but the kid, being a minor, would just get a slap on the wrist and probably not even go to jail. For an adult, it was a different deal. So now we see very much the same thing going on in Vermont with these gangs coming up from Massachusetts and whatnot. And they've got 16 and 17 and 18
right.
years to be the runners.
Absolutely. No, I've drawn that parallel too. That there is a lot of similarities between the alcohol trade and the booze trade. The one thing I noticed in the media also, like they do today, they like to gin up things a little bit for ratings or for readership.
No.
Yeah. They did it back then too. If you were a good-looking woman bootlegger, you were going to get attention, and notoriety, whether you deserved it or not, the reporters loved a good story of, like, I have been writing now about, her name escapes me, but the queen of bootleggers she lived in various places south of Vermont, but then also like I believe it was Newfane, Vermont. It's down around Bennington. And when it comes to these women, then there was the bobtail bootlegger, a bandit.
Marie Bushwick, right.
Yeah, yeah, and then you had Queen Lil from Rich. They painted them as different than the men. Like you don't find articles talking about the swashbuckling, handsome man bootlegger, but they go into great detail about what they were wearing, how they kept their hair, and I think the media, as it does today, they create larger than life people,
Mm.
and so women bootleggers during that time, they certainly got more than their share of attention.
Well, it just goes to show you that sensationalism never goes out of style.
Yeah, oh no, that's it. And
Yeah.
I think it's ramped up on steroids now. And I think even though I will say I love going through old newspapers on any topic, um, the I find the writing to be far more fascinating and detail oriented than today, which a lot of it I find today's newspapers, and maybe it was true back then. I find them more. It's more like mixed. It's news mixed in with opinion. But I really enjoy. I could sit right back and read old newspapers. Even day to day activities in the town columns can be interesting.
Well, they are. They're great sources of information. Um, there's a weekly newspaper just up several miles up the road from me in Manchester called the Manchester Journal. And I've gotten into old copies of it and found things in society columns. You know, Mr. and Mrs. So and so are vacationing in Florida and they're expected back at such and such a time. Well, what an invitation to burglarize a house. Uh, Little things like that made their way into my book too. And it was interesting that you mentioned the one of these bootleg queens, because I've got one in this book, and she has taken over from her recently deceased husband. She's a Canadian citizen, and she runs a very popular resort up near Sherbrooke in Canada. Um, it also happens to be a house of prostitution.
Yeah.
Uh, quite a lot of things going on in this book that pique one's interest in that era when there are a lot of very racy things going on across the border. So, anyway, your turn.
Yeah. So, well, have you talked about the name of the book yet?
Have I talked about it?
Yeah. What's the name of the book?
Oh, no, I haven't. Thank you for reminding me. It's called Bootleggers, Bullets, and Brothers in the Kingdom. Um, there are bootleggers in this. There are also a couple of rustic. Their names are Tom and Seth. I don't even have a last name for them. And they appear in and out, woven in through the pages of this story. And they are ne'er-do-wells in the summertime. In season, they're grave diggers. And in the fall, they hang up their shovels and they go to work with an old 3-ton truck. And they're thieves. They go and they steal lumber. They steal logs from logging camps, logs that are unattended, left beside the road. And they're interesting characters. Let me read something to you from chapter 17, and this is where we get to meet them. And it's called An Uncle's Monkey. Once the October page of the calendar had been turned to reveal November's, it was what the locals call stick season. That time is the time that follows the splendor of foliage and tricks or treats of Halloween. It lasts well past the time the blizzards blow into the kingdom until spring. It's when the bare brown hills and purple mountains, except where spruce, evergreens, and pines hold sway, are as prickly as an ornery hog's back, bristling with naked, spiky-looking trees. Billy's acquaintances, Tom and Seth, cemetery caretakers, and gravediggers extraordinaire, were out in the woods late one cold night during this dreary time of year. This was hardly odd at all because, for one good reason, the ground in area cemeteries would soon be frozen solid, and there would be no burial or caretaking work for them. The bodies of folks who inconsiderably kicked off during the frigid winter months were Junior's problems solved either by storage of the deceased in TR's ice house or else in a crypt down in St. Johnsbury. So the two boys, Tom and Seth, longtime pals, hung up their spades well before Thanksgiving Day and worked odd jobs afterward using their battered old 3-ton truck. They cut timber for firewood, or so they said, out among the tall trees up in the high sunny hills and down in the dark, quiet valleys and hollows clustered around Hazen's Corners. Their thievery gets to be so pervasive and so bad that locals start referring to their predations as the work of the Midnight Logging Company. There you go.
Neil, did you base your people like, I knew Howard Mosier, and as most people did, and Howard would, I talked to Howard about, how he came up with characters, and some of them were actual characters that he knew in real life that he just spun into different stories. Others of them was a concoction of different people that he knew that he weaved together. How did you come up with your people?
Well,
or is it just your imagination?
It's imagination, observation of other people, some inspired by folks I've met. Although, like every author, you say, this is a work of fiction. But come on, let's face it. If you're not writing from life, you're not writing. And you can't, I read about people who sit down and force themselves to write. And you can't go by word count. You go by people. And if you're not an inveterate people watcher, you're not going to be able to do this little thing when you get stuck. If you don't know where you're going to go next, you stop and you get into the skin of the character you're writing about, and you say, well, you know what? What would Billy do? Knowing Billy as I do, what would he do in this situation? You got to think like the character. And that's when you start to move the chess pieces forward, and you know that you can win the game. Because there's really, I don't believe in writer's block. So.
Also, though, I've got to tell the viewers and listeners, if they don't know it, you're no stranger to the writing and publishing world.
No, I've written I started out writing books on railroads. The more recent one was called Rutland in Color for Morning Sun Books back in 2003, I believe it was. My first novel was called, for Pete's sake, now you got me. Now I've got your writer's block. My first novel came out in 2021. Let me just quickly grab a copy, As Crooked as They Come. It's a Boston crime drama. But that was interspersed with other things that I was doing going back in time. Between 2008 and 2019, I was the editor and publisher of Vermont magazine. And I retired from that in 2019 and got to work on the first novel, and just recently wrapped up Bootleggers, Bullets and Brothers in the Kingdom, the second one, which is going to be released October 1st. You might be able to tell me if I'm correct or wrong, or you don't know. I seem to remember Kim, the owner of Green Mountain Books, telling me at one point her business was a garage. It was.
That was used by bootleggers.
Mm-hmm. And that garage figures in my book too. When my character Joey Ross is headed up to Canada, on the way he stops there to fill up the gas tank of the Packard, and the garage was in the corner of that block. It was in the northeast corner, and you could actually drive your car under a sort of portico under the corner of the building and get your gas and oil, get your windshield washed.
I believe she has a photo of that building back from that era on the wall, or at least I've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, we only have about 5 more minutes left. How are people going to be able to buy your book?
That's That's always a thing that you need to think about. I would encourage them to go to their local bookstore first. Um, Green Mountain Books. I haven't talked with Boxcar and Caboose and St. J, but um, they, I don't know exactly when they're going to be able to order. I presume it's going to be October 1st when the title is released. But I was a brick and mortar guy once myself. I ran a small IGA supermarket. I managed a Radio Shack store before I got into sales. Did a lot of things, but we need to support bookstores in the state of Vermont and every other state as well. So if you're going to look for bootleggers, bullets, and brothers in the kingdom, please go to your favorite bookstore first before you try to do the online stuff. Make sense?
So, yeah, I think you were saying you don't have a site of your own where you're selling them. So,
No.
I'm not sure how many bookstores we have in the Northeast Kingdom. We have one in Lyndonville, St. Johnsbury, Hardwick.
Montpelier.
And I think we have one in Newport on East Main Street. The name escapes me.
Used to be Woodnot, I think.
Yeah, Woodnot's gone now. That was Main Street, and they're gone. But there is another one up on. I wished I could say it's on East Main Street in Newport. But
I miss a lot of things about Newport, and one of them is Frank and Pierre's, the Chinese restaurant where I always got back in the day.
That used to be a steakhouse at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I will tell you though, if you like Chinese food, you can step it up. And right on Main Street is Dusset Thai. I spend a lot of time traveling, including in Asia, and I'll tell you, Dusset Thai has some amazing Thai food. It's almost second to none.
Yeah, I would always make a tour of local diners and restaurants when I was on the road, both for the magazine and back when I was a salesman for a photo finishing company called CTC and Wilson Photo. I was with them for about 28 years and had a lot of customers up in the NEK, all the way up into Derby. Buzz Roy was one of my customers.
Oh, Buzzy.
At the pharmacy. About 50 feet away from the U.S.-Canada border. Just a great guy.
He would have been a good character for a book because there was more to Buzz than just being a pharmacist. He was a turtle racer at one point. He kept all the turtles, and they'd have turtle races at the Long Branch restaurant, and
turtle race.
Turtle races.
What happens if there's a rollover?
Huh?
What happens if there's a rollover?
But he was accused of juicing up his one of the turtles that was his, but he said that is not. No, he did not. But he said he would either give it a bath in warm or cold water. I can't remember which one that made it go faster.
No, you give him Tabasco sauce.
Right. Yeah. And then later on, he became kind of like trying to reclaim our border from the insanity that followed after 9/11.
Oh,
yeah. All right. Give you about 2 more minutes. What more would you like to say about your book, or what your future is, or?
Well, I really don't know. Life's uncertain. That's what keeps me getting up in the morning. I don't have plans to really do anything else. You may notice. One thing I wanted to point out on the cover of that book.
Yeah.
I was stuck for a while on what to do. And then I decided I'd use this photograph of my grandfather, Wes Jordan, with his first brand new car, which is a 1930 Studebaker. And Wes was a Studebaker guy through and through. He worked for Orvis Company in Manchester for many, many years. And he's very disappointed when Studebaker stopped making cars and he became a Mopar man.
Okay, well, it looks like we're just about out of time, but I want to thank you for coming on. I'm glad you reached out for me, and it was a privilege to have gotten one of the first reads in it. And because, as you know, the topic of prohibition is near and dear to my heart. I can't get enough of it. As I said, I'm a person who's never even gotten a speeding ticket, but writing about crime is probably better than committing it. So I think I'll stay on this side of the law for now.
And his writing about history is good. You never run out of stuff because there's more and more history that happens every day.
Actually, people tell me all the time, but you're going to run out of old people to interview. And I says, nope, they make old people every day. And I'm on the doorstep to 60. And so I don't know when you become old, but I must be getting a little bit closer. So,
yeah, I'm
right.
there too. It was more fun being 20 in the 70s than it is being 72 in the 20s, but I'm having fun.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm having
Nice
a ball.
chatting with this guy.
All right. Thank you for coming on. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.